The world ended not with a wail, but with the taste of smoke. One moment, Kofi was threading a leather cord through a carved ivory tusk, the evening sun washing the walls of his compound in gold. The next, the air was thick with the wrong kind of smoke. Not the clean, fragrant whisper of cooking fires, but the greasy, choking blackness of thatch burning. Then came the screams, not the startled cries of an accident, but a rising chorus of pure, animal terror that severed the tranquil evening like an axe through bone. His father, Adolfo, met his eyes from across the hut. In that shared glance, a lifetime of peace was annihilated. Adolfo's face, usually a map of wise, smiling creases, hardened into a mask of terrifying clarity. Asterisk fantiefo, asterisk, he breathed, a word that meant both raiders and the end of things. Run to the forest, Kofi. Now. His voice was a low, urgent command, but it was too late. The door, a woven lattice of strong bamboo, exploded inward. Silhouetted against the hellish orange glow outside were figures that seemed neither man nor demon. Their skins were pale like a grub under a rock, but their faces were contorted with a ferocity that was utterly human. One held a firebrand, the other a thing of gleaming metal and dark wood that ended in a cruel, flared mouth. Kofi's younger sister, Alma, screamed. The sound seemed to activate the raiders. The one with the firebrand backhanded his mother, Ifia, sending her crashing into the grinding stone. The world slowed, then sped into a nightmare blur. Kofi lunged, not towards the invaders, but towards the spirit shelf where the ancestral figures stood. His fingers closed around the smooth, cool wood of his grandfather's carving, a protective Akubie doll, a talisman, a hope. A crushing weight slammed into the back of his head. Light fractured into 1,000 splinters of pain. The last thing he knew was the rough fiber of a sack engulfing him. The muffled sound of his father's roaring defiance being cut short by a sound like a wet melon splitting, and the smell of his own blood mixing with the acrid sting of smoke and a new, alien stench. The sour sweat of the pale men. Consciousness returned in waves of nausea and disorientation. He was not in a sack, but bound by coarse rope at wrists and ankles, linked in a line with other men. The air was a solid thing, humid and ripe with the smell of terror, sweat, and human waste. They were in a stockade by a vast, impossible expanse of water that stretched to the edge of the sky, water that growled and roared like a living beast. The sight of it, so immense and restless, stole the breath from his lungs. This was the ocean his father had spoken of in tales of great spirits and distant lands. It was not a thing of stories. It was a hungry gray maw. The line jerked forward. They were being driven toward a long, narrow canoe, but one of monstrous proportions, with great, bare trees rising from its belly and sails like the folded wings of a gigantic dead bird. Its sides were lined with more pale men, watching with an appalling indifference. This was the ship. It stank even from here, a cocktail of rot, tar, and something sweetly foul that clawed at the back of his throat. On the beach, a scene of pure pandemonium unfolded. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people from different nations, languages etched in the lines of their faces and the scars on their skin, were being sorted, branded, and bartered. A child, no older than 5, ran wailing for a woman being shoved towards a different ship. A white-skinned man in a stiff, sweat-stained coat calmly brought down a whip on the child's back, silencing the cries into choked sobs. Kofi saw a man of the Hausa, tall and proud, seize the branding iron from a sailor's hand and swing it. The crack of a gun was shockingly loud. The Hausa man dropped, a dark flower blooming on his chest. The transaction around his body did not even pause. "Move, black cattle!" A voice barked in a guttural, ugly tongue. A shove between his shoulder blades sent him stumbling up a groaning, narrow plank. The wood under his bare feet was splintered and stained. As he crossed the threshold from land to ship, a profound chill seized him, deeper than the ocean spray. He was leaving the world. The spirits of his ancestors, the smell of the earth after rain, the laughter of Alma, they could not cross this water. Below deck was a darkness so profound it felt solid. The stench hit him first, a wall of putridity so thick he retched dryly. It was the smell of packed, unwashed bodies, of vomit, of open sores, of the slop buckets that overflowed in the aisles. The ceiling was so low he could not stand upright. He was shoved onto a bare wooden shelf, his ankles immediately clamped into iron shackles bolted to the deck. The man next to him, an older Igbo with a musician's long, delicate fingers, was chained to the same bar. Their bodies would be each other's landscape for the journey. The hatch above slammed shut, plunging them into a blackness punctuated only by thin slivers of light from between deck boards. The ship groaned, a deep wooden agony. Then came the sound of creaking ropes, shouted commands from above, and a terrible lurch. The world moved. The great wooden beast had taken them. Days and nights bled into a timeless, suffering present. They were fed once a day, a lukewarm slop of beans or gruel, shoved into their mouths with a ladle if they were too weak to eat. Water was rationed in a single cup, warm and tasting of wood. The whole became a furnace under the sun, the air stagnant and buzzing with flies. At night, it was a dank crypt, the chill seeping into bones, already aching from immobility. The man next to him, the Igbo, was named Chidi. He spoke a little of Kofi's language, mixed with hand signs and the shared grammar of suffering. "They call this the deliverance," Chidi whispered one night, his voice a dry rasp. His fingers, once made for plucking strings, now picked absently at the festering sore around his manacle. A name for their salvation. For us, it is the belly of the beast. Death came often and casually. One morning, the man across from him simply did not wake up. His eyes were open, clouded, fixed on the deck boards above. Sailors came down, cursing. They unlocked the corpse, dragged it by its ankles up the ladder, its head thumping on each rung. A splash, brief and final, echoed down into the hold. No words were spoken, no rites observed. The ocean was a bottomless, silent grave. Kofi clung to the Akuabiye doll, hidden in the fold of his ragged loincloth. He prayed to his ancestors, to the river spirit, to any force that might hear him in this godless place. But the only answers were the relentless groan of the ship, the retching of the sick, and the mad, babbling songs of those whose minds had broken. A new horror arrived with the still air. The seas grew calm, the ship's movement a sluggish roll. The heat intensified, baking the hold into an oven. Sickness, which had always walked among them, now danced. Dysentery ripped through the human cargo. The whales took on a new, weaker tenor. The smell became unbearable, a physical presence. Chidi grew feverish. His breath came in short, hot gasps. "My daughter," he murmured, his eyes bright with delirium. She had a voice like a morning bird. She would sing to the yam vines. He seized Kofi's wrist with surprising strength. "Do not let them make you an animal. The body they can chain. The spirit," he coughed a wet, ragged sound. "The spirit is a seed. Even in stone, a seed can sleep a long time." Chidi died 2 nights later. Kofi felt the life leave him, a subtle slackening, then a final, quiet exhalation. He lay there, chained to a dead man, for hours until the sailors made their rounds. When they unshackled Chidi's body, Kofi's ankle was raw and bleeding from the violent jerk of the chain. Despair was a weight heavier than the irons. He stopped eating. He welcomed the hollow feeling, the drifting detachment. He would join Chidi. He would join his father. It was a woman who pulled him back. She was from a distant people, tall and regal even in emaciation. She was chained in the women's hold, but sometimes during the scant exercise time on deck, where they were forced to jump under the whip to keep their muscles from total atrophy, their eyes would meet. One day, as he listlessly allowed the gruel to slide down his chin, she shouted across the deck, her voice cutting through the moaning. "Asterisk, you eat?" "Asterisk," she commanded in a broken version of a trade tongue. "Asterisk, you live?" "Asterisk." She met his gaze, her own eyes burning with an undimmed fire. "Asterisk, the story is not finished." Asterisk. Her words, her defiance, were a spark in his darkness. He forced the next ladle of slop down. It was an act of rebellion. To live was to defy them. The journey became a blur of suffering punctuated by moments of surreal horror and fragile connection. A young man, driven mad by thirst, somehow freed himself during a storm and leapt over the rail, shrieking with laughter as he vanished into the raging waves. A woman gave birth in the bloody, filthy aisle. The infant's first cry was stifled by a sailor who coldly declared it bad for insurance and threw the tiny body overboard. The mother's silent, shuddering grief filled the hold more completely than any scream. Yet in whispers, in stolen touches of a hand on a shoulder, in the humming of a half-remembered song from home, the community persisted. They shared names. They shared fragments of stories. They plotted no grand rebellion. The chains and guns made that a fantasy, but they practiced a quieter resistance, the preservation of self. After an eternity, 60 sunrises glimpsed through the hatch. Chitty had counted before he died. The smell changed. The clean, endless scent of salt was replaced by a muddy, organic odor. Land, a different land. They were brought on deck, blinking like moles in the brutal sunlight. The sight was not of the lush, green shores of home, but of a flat, sprawling expanse of docks teeming with a different kind of frenzy. More pale men, in finer clothes, walked among them, poking at muscles, examining teeth, pulling back lips to inspect gums as if they were buying horses. The auction block was a stage of ultimate humiliation. Stripped naked, Kofi stood while strange hands probed his flesh, while numbers were shouted in a language that reduced him to currency. The Akubie doll was discovered and tossed aside like trash. He was purchased by a man with a face like cold dough and sent to a place called Fairwind Plantation. The next decades were a different chapter of the same nightmare. The sun here was a hammer. The work in the cane fields was a slow, systematic breaking of the body. The whip, called the overseer's sermon, was a constant punctuation to existence. He was given a new name, Caleb. He learned to answer to it. He saw the timeline of the trade etch itself into his life. He heard whispers of other ships, other horrors. He saw new arrivals, fresh from the Middle Passage, their eyes still holding the ghostly shock of the hold, marched in coffles down the dusty roads. He heard talk among the white men, snippets overheard while serving rum. The British had outlawed the trade, but sleek, fast ships still ran the blockade. The Americans had followed, but the domestic trade, the tearing of families from the Chesapeake to the cotton frontiers, was more brutal than ever. He married a woman named Bess, a healer from the U people. They built a love in the shadow of the whip, a tender, secret thing. They had a son, whom they secretly called Kwame, though the ledger listed him as Samuel. Kofi taught him, in whispers at night, the stories of the Akan, the shape of the coastline of home, the meaning of his true name. The seed, sleeping in stone. When Kwame was 10, Bess caught a fever from nursing a child in the quarters. The master's doctor would not come. She died in Kofi's arms, her breath becoming part of the heavy night air. The grief was a familiar companion, another layer of scar tissue on his soul. The years ground on. The world outside the plantation began to tremble. Strange, urgent words drifted on the wind. Asterisk abolitionist. Rebellion. John Brown. War between the states. Asterisk the master grew angry, then fearful. One day, a troop of ragged blue-coated soldiers appeared on the horizon. The overseer fled. The master, red-faced, screamed about his property being stolen. An officer, a young man with a weary face, stood on the porch and read from a paper in a loud, clear voice. All persons held as slaves within any state shall be thenceforward, and forever free. A silence fell over the quarters, so profound the buzzing of flies seemed loud. Then a sound began. It started low, a hum from the chest of the oldest woman there, a song from the Congo she had not sung in 40 years. It spread, building into a wave of weeping, of shouting, of a raw, unfathomable joy that was also a gut-wrenching sorrow for all the lost years, the lost people. Kofi, now an old man with a back bent like a bow and a map of scars on his skin, did not dance. He walked slowly, painfully, to the edge of the cane field. He looked out, not at the crops, but at the sky. He thought of his father's last roar, of Chitty's feverish wisdom, of Bess's gentle touch, of his son Kwame, who was now a man staring in dazed hope at the blue-coated soldiers. He knelt, his joints protesting. With his bare, gnarled hands, he began to dig in the red earth. The soil was hard, packed by generations of trampling feet. He dug until his fingers bled. Finally, his fingertips brushed against something smooth and solid. He pulled it out. It was the Akuba doll. He had, on the day of his sale, glimpsed where a sympathetic kitchen slave had kicked it, burying it in the soft dirt by the fence. He had marked the spot in his mind, a secret promise to himself. He wiped the dirt from the small wooden face. The carving was worn, but the features, the serene oval, the large, watchful eyes, were still clear. It had crossed the ocean in spirit, waiting for him. He held it to his heart, feeling the sun warm his old head. The silence around him was no longer the silence of oppression, but the fragile, trembling quiet of a new dawn. The story was not finished. The seed, after sleeping so long in stone, had finally felt a crack of light. It was not an end, but a brutal, hard-won beginning. The timeline of horror had reached a comma, not a period. And he, Kofi, who had become Caleb, was still here to witness it. He breathed in the free air, heavy with the scent of cane and possibility. And for the first time in 65 years, the taste on his tongue was not of smoke, nor of blood, nor of salt, but of something fragile, tentative, and utterly new.